You're watching Fisheries Strong, a programme exploring the importance of the science, practices and policies strengthening America's fisheries. Hello and welcome to Fisheries Strong, a programme from American Fisheries Society and ITN Productions. I'm Natasha Kaplinsky. In this programme, we're going to be raising awareness of the societal and economic benefits from sound fisheries management, effective fisheries conservation, remediation, and the key challenges for the future of fisheries management. American Fisheries Society outlines some of the complex challenges faced in today's world on our aquatic systems and how it impacts our economy, society and science. Reporter Mikaela Hunt went to find out more.
From the earliest native peoples to today's commercial fishermen and recreational anglers, North America's diverse fisheries have been a vital resource. But today, fisheries face serious challenges. Fortunately, a group of scientists and managers are watching over our aquatic resources to sustain them for future generations.
If you don't have good water quality, you're not going to have good fisheries.
People that like to eat seafood, fisheries matter for that. People that like to go angling, it's important that you have fisheries professionals that are keeping track of those populations as well. There are all these different ways that thriving aquatic ecosystems support us without us being even aware of it. You don't have clean drinking water if you don't have stable aquatic habitats.
Those aquatic habitats are impacted by a broad range of activities worldwide. This group of fisheries professionals gather around the country and throughout the year to share their latest research, innovations, and best management practices. They also work together to address the complex connections of fish to their habitat. Doug Ostern is the executive director of the American Fisheries Society.
The biggest other thing is land use change. You know, with the expansion of population, with industry, where I live, it's warehouses being built. Every time you change the land, you change what impacts the aquatic system, the streams and rivers.
Commercial and recreational fisheries and marine systems have an annual impact of more than $300 billion on our economy. AFS works to educate and empower citizens and decision makers with knowledge, from the most basic observations to the most advanced fisheries management models.
There are some of the field biologists that, maybe the highest level of technology that they're operating with in the field is a seine, a net that they're dragging through a pond or a river to sample fish and capture them to see what's there. And then there are the people that are doing laboratory work and blasting the ear bones of fish with lasers to understand their chemical composition so you know where that fish spent most of its life.
AFS is the world's oldest and largest professional fisheries society with 150 years of leadership to show for it. And today it is still advancing fisheries science, fisheries professions, and helping conserve habitat both inland and coastal. This cutting-edge, peer-reviewed science is then shared with policymakers to help them understand what actions need to be taken to conserve fisheries in today's rapidly changing world.
We're in a big moment with climate change. This is probably one of the greatest challenges that's faced humanity.
Scott Bonar, professor at the University of Arizona and the AFS president-elect. He tells us 50% of the trout habitat in the United States is disappearing, and the root cause is climate change. If people don't start to hear the message, harmful impacts to our environment could be difficult to reverse.
The thing that really struck me when I talked to some of the climatologists is it's not something where we can have climate change stop polluting and then it goes away. Fish ranges are moving north and it's gradual, and so commercial fishermen have to go farther north to get their catch.
The results are more than just environmental. They have financial impact as well. More than 90% of the American seafood supply is imported, costing the country more than $11 billion when you consider the trade deficit. Meanwhile, fisheries college students also have a vested interest in this, and they have a seat at the AFS table.
In school, it really sparked my interest, and I just decided to follow it.
I think that they are more aware and take the threats of the potential for climate change more seriously than old folks like me who are going to die before it's really a big deal. And for them, it's very immediate. And when they think of 2030 or 2050, that is in the crux of their life.
Long serving as a voice for fisheries and the professionals who care for them, AFS is a respected information resource on some of the largest issues facing policymakers.
The irony of this whole thing is that there's some of the best climate scientists in the world in our government. And yet their voices are not being heard at the level that they need to be. We need to get that voice heard. We need to allow people to understand those impacts. We need to get these people to be able to do their jobs the way they need to.
Communicating fish responses to climate change in everyday language could greatly increase the ability of fisheries professionals and typical citizens to relate to these changes. A more clear understanding should lead to greater discussion and may enable people to make more informed decisions. In Cleveland, Ohio, I'm Mikaela Hunt.
State water contractors tackle the need for water for both fish and people in California. State water contractors are doing collaborative science on longfin as an example to demonstrate how science and collaboration can be used to improve policy decision making on a state level. Daniela Elias finds out more.
Two-thirds of Californians receive at least some portion of their water from the State Water Project. So it's very critical to California's economy and to the well-being of the entire state.
Jennifer Pierre is the general manager of the State Water Contractors, a California statewide association that represents agencies who deliver water to more than 27 million residents and agriculture land through the State Water Project. How much water can be pumped from the San Francisco estuary and the Delta and delivered to Californians is constrained by protection for fish and wildlife, water quality, and environmental purposes.
The Delta serves from a water supply perspective as a kind of a hub for where that water moves through, but it also is a host to hundreds of species, some that are endemic to the Delta that you don't find anywhere else in the world. And the problems that we're facing in the Delta are really a need to protect the environment and protect the water supply for two-thirds of Californians, and somehow figuring out what the right balance is using the best available science that we can do together.
Which is why the State Water Contractors are collaborating with their partners to invest in new research that will spur future policymaking and improve water management practices throughout California. An example of this is the research on longfin smelt that the State Water Contractors has been doing with academics, government, private sectors, and public water agencies.
This goes back 2 decades. When we realized that a whole bunch of species, particularly fish in the estuary, responded in abundance positively to freshwater flow.
San Francisco State University research professor Wim Kimmerer says this relationship has been used for protection of longfin smelt, but they found that the relationships include complex mechanisms that are not necessarily addressed by management actions.
Over the years, my lab and some other people have been whittling away at these questions and trying to get a handle on how these flow-fish relationships actually work. We think the decline is food-related, but we don't really know a good way to improve the amount of food available. So we're looking at getting a better handle at what they eat at different life stages. We're using molecular methods, using DNA to investigate their feeding, as well as traditional microscopic methods.
What we're looking at is trying to understand the mechanisms that drive longfin smelt abundance in the San Francisco estuary. So when we started this research just a few years ago, where we started was in these marsh habitats. So these little marsh channels that the long-term monitoring programs typically don't go in. We decided, well, let's take a look. Let's see what's in these marshes. And to our surprise, we found a lot of larvae. So we found that longfin smelt were spawning and hatching in these marsh environments, which is pretty cool because they're pelagic fish, and I think most people thought that they would be in the open waters and the channels. So I think it was somewhat surprising to a lot of folks in the system to find that we found so many in these marsh channels. One of the main reasons why the monitoring was developed was to look at the impacts of those water diversions on striped bass. And this information has been useful for looking at some annual abundance and trends over time. But the programs themselves were centered in sampling fishes in channel habitats, not in these marsh habitats that we're looking at. So that's where our research is pretty cool, is being able to add on to those long-term monitoring programs and figuring out what's going on with longfin beyond the footprint of these long-term monitoring programs.
These results underscore how little is known about the species and how longfin smelt use estuary habitats. This lack of knowledge can limit effective management strategies to restore habitats for the species.
We built a predictive map, or a predictive model that we could then, using hydrodynamic models that map salinity, turbidity, and temperature in the system, we can make predictions about where we'd expect to find longfin in the whole San Francisco estuary, even out beyond where we were sampling for longfin and these other species. The model is predicting now longfin are using habitats well outside of where we have traditionally monitored fish species in the estuary. And it suggests that this longfin population is much more broadly distributed than we give them credit for. So if we want to protect and restore this longfin population, I think it's time for us to think about how we can align our monitoring system for the longfin population.
By working with state and federal agencies, academics, water providers, and other stakeholders, the state water contractors can be a partner to help improve the health of fish and wildlife in the estuary while providing reliable water supplies for years to come.
We share fish, we share our knowledge, we share information, and by being collaborative, what it does is it strengthens the information that we provide for the agencies because it comes from a united front.
By looking at the state's water supply challenges through a scientific lens, the state water contractors can help the state achieve a more reliable water supply for California and protect, restore, and enhance the estuary ecosystem.
When we're trying to look at our water supply reliability, we know that that's linked to ecosystem health. The better the ecosystem's doing, the better our water supply reliability is. And so I think we're just fundamentally shifting about how we invest in science and how we interact with the broader community about solving the problem, because we know that if we can help solve the ecosystem problem, that we're also helping solve kind of our primary issue, which is the water supply reliability piece of it.
The state water contractors are working with these and other partners to implement a collaborative science-based approach to improve the health of the native species and rivers and provide reliable water supplies for years to come.
We are on borrowed time right now for the Delta in terms of fish and water supply. And we need to actually figure out how to work together to solve some of these problems. I mean, I don't think there's another choice. We cannot continue what we've been doing.
In Benicia, California, I'm Danielle Elias.
Our reporter Tim Estiloz joins biologists on a mission to preserve one of Arizona's most unique natural species. The Gila trout is becoming established in Arizona, partly due to watershed management planning efforts implemented by the Arizona Game and Fish Department, balancing the conservation of native species whilst providing angling opportunities for the public.
Yeah, we'll put about 10 to 15 trout in each bucket.
These fish biologists are on a rescue mission to preserve one of Arizona's most unique natural species. The Gila trout is a source of great pride for both southwestern preservationists and sportsmen.
Gila trout is one of 3 native sport fish to Arizona. We have the Gila trout, the Apache trout, and the round-tail chub. All 3 provide a unique opportunity that you can't find anywhere else besides the Southwest, and in some cases just in Arizona. Oak Creek is one of those historic tributaries where Gila trout used to historically reside.
Unfortunately, the invasion of non-native species of fish have endangered the Gila trout and other native aquatic species swimming within Arizona's creeks, prompting the need for restorative action.
Historically, we had 33 native fish species that were indigenous to Arizona. And today, 32 still reside in Arizona. Gila trout is one of those. There are a number of threats that we see that cause the declines of these native species. Everything from limited water resources, water diversions, impoundments, livestock grazing, drought, wildfire. One of the largest is the conflicts between undesirable non-natives or invasive species in our state and native fish.
In order to manage these threats, aquatic wildlife biologists have undertaken a comprehensive watershed planning process.
Arizona's extreme topographical diversity is a driving force between the diversity that we see across our state. Today we're talking about our watershed planning process and our management planning efforts across the state. And what that does is it balances our sport fish opportunities with our native fish management to ensure not only that our native fish species can exist not only for current generations but future generations, but also provide sport fish opportunity to meet the needs of our public throughout Arizona.
And managing that balance comes in a variety of different forms.
Our planning process is working through public involvement, addressing social political concerns, but really providing a systematic data-driven process that essentially carves the state up and balances both the sport fishing opportunities and native fish management.
So these are ready to release.
As part of restoring the native Gila trout to its former abundance, fish biologists are working diligently to replenish the supply with new fish, while scientifically removing invasive species that pose a threat.
We are trying to establish a Gila trout population here. So we've been stocking Gila trout in this stream since 2015. We stock once or twice a year, and our goal is to establish a self-sustaining population of Gila trout. We do stock Gila trout for a number of reasons, not just to establish a population for recovery, but also to provide a recreational opportunity for anglers.
Fish like Gila trout are becoming more and more important here in the state of Arizona and nationwide because many of the anglers are desiring to catch native wild fish in wild places.
However, pleasing the anglers and maintaining the environment requires a delicate juggling act.
Not all of sport fish restoration and native fish conservation is compatible. And so you have to look at that conservation by tributary, by stream, and by watershed to make sure that you're doing the responsible thing. There's social, political pressure, endangered species, and legal requirements. There are anglers who fund conservation, so there are a lot of moving parts.
And those moving parts appear to be running smoothly for the restoration of Gila trout. However, other species also benefit from these efforts.
We have narrow-headed garter snakes, which is another threatened species that are endemic to this area, and their main forage food are fish, and they prefer native fish. So establishing a population of native trout here is also going to benefit the narrow-headed garter snake.
Here at Fossil Creek, fish biologists work to restore the native aquatic species that were once abundant here.
So we are taking this round-tailed chub and putting it on the measuring board to get a total length.
The native aquatic species at Fossil Creek have been impacted by multiple problems, some of them man-made.
So over 100 years ago, Arizona Public Service, or what became Arizona Public Service, built a hydroelectric plant in the upper part of Fossil Creek. And this involved building a dam and diverting most of the flow from the creek to create hydropower. Following that, we had a lot of non-native fish invasion, such as green sunfish, smallmouth bass, from the Verde River that came upstream and started colonizing the stream.
But now, various efforts, including a nearby hatchery and a new fish barrier, have literally turned the tide in favor of the native fish at Fossil Creek.
One of our most abundant fish species is the round-tailed chub, and it was probably the fish that benefited the most post-renovation, and now the stream is just chock full of this beautiful fish.
However, several other native species have also benefited from this renovation.
So we've talked about round-tailed chub, but Sonora sucker, longfin dace, speckled dace, and desert sucker are also really important parts of this fish community.
Thanks to these conservation efforts, Fossil Creek is now also a popular destination for anglers.
This was the very first round-tailed chub sport fishery opened in the state. Sport fishing factors into this stream in a couple of different ways. The first and most important were they were a critical partner in us being able to do the renovation here. We needed to convince leadership at all levels that this was an important project, and having sportsmen be supportive and contribute to this project was really, really important in it happening in the first place.
Well, I think we're trend setting throughout the Western United States by really taking a hard look, a comprehensive look at watershed planning on what we're managing for where, and essentially just carving that the state up and providing those priorities and resources needed to implement those projects on the ground.
It's also a restoration mission that evokes a great sense of accomplishment and pride for everyone involved.
What gives me joy is every time we come out here and somebody sets a net, or we're even just sitting on the bank, and we can watch the brown-tailed chub or the suckers swim by, or you can throw some debris in the water and you can see these fish and how well they're doing. And you look at the people you work with, people who you sweat and lived with for months on end, and it's a bond you just can't forge anywhere else. It's we together have done this amazing thing to put it back to the way it was to some extent, but we couldn't do that alone. And it's a great reminder that it takes a really big team to do really great things.
Changing climate and land use threaten water quality and cold water species like cisco by creating longer periods of stratification and increasing nutrient inputs that decrease the oxygen that fish need. Our reporter went to find out how the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources are aiding and supporting watershed protection and sustaining fisheries.
10 Mile is just the gem of Minnesota. It's got great water clarity. It's really got low nutrients, which allows the clarity to be really clear. And it provides really good oxygen down deep. It's a very deep lake and allows for good fish habitat for cisco and other fish in the lake.
Currently, the water quality in Minnesota lakes is threatened by increased land use, agricultural development, and climate change. 10 Mile Lake is one of about 50 lakes the Department of Natural Resources are targeting for watershed protection. The DNR is taking a proactive strategy to watershed protection, as protecting the watershed is effective and less expensive than trying to restore it after the damage is done.
We're working with the Division of Fisheries to protect lakes that they have identified as priority for the cisco habitat.
Cisco are a really important member of the fish community. There's about 650 lakes in Minnesota with cisco in them, and we find that the predator species do really well when they can feed on ciscos.
Changing climate and land use threaten water quality and cold water species like cisco by increasing nutrient inputs that decrease the oxygen that fish need, and by creating longer periods of stratification. During the summer, when the lake is stratified, the water layers separate, with warm water on top and cold water below.
We call it a squeeze. The oxygen disappears from the bottom, so there can be a fairly narrow band where the fish actually have water that's cold enough and has enough oxygen.
Part of my job as a fisheries manager is to take what this team of researchers is doing and apply that to fisheries management plans, if we're adjusting any regulations, and really just outreach with the public and education so that they understand what's going on in the lakes and what we can do about it.
And it's important to work in partnership, because that way we can pool our resources and get more projects done and have a bigger impact on the landscape.
We really need those local groups that provide outreach to the community and can help connect conservation-minded landowners to the funding opportunities. So groups in this area would include the Northern Waters Land Trust, which has helped purchase some conservation easements in the area. They've also been able to purchase some prime lakefront that they've been able to donate to government entities like ourselves to protect for the future.
Easements, or land purchase, protect the land by preventing the addition of nutrients and maintains system resilience in the face of climate change.
If we can get 75% of the watershed and some of our real gems around the state, like this one, protected, we can be confident that it's going to be able to maintain its quality and its fishery pretty much indefinitely.
From 10 Mile Lake in Minnesota, I'm Danella Seelock for Nile.
Reducing Asian carp is a top priority for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources Aquatic Nuisance Species Program and its manager, Kevin Irons. The objective is preventing the carp from reaching the Great Lakes, where they could devastate the $7 billion fishing industry. Diane Easterbrook went to see how.
Riding over waves instead of prairie, these Illinois River cowboys are headed to a roundup. But they won't be roping cattle, they'll be lassoing Asian carp. The invasive fish have threatened the river's aquatic life for years. The carp breed aggressively and compete with native fish for food. Cowboy Shawn calls them a cagey catch.
They're super smart, they're super fast.
Each week, a posse of fishermen contracted by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources takes to the river near Ottawa, Illinois. Joined by state biologists, they set up thousands of yards of nets in coves. Then, revving outboard motors and banging on their boats, the fishermen drive the carp into the nets.
You just gotta pound the tar out of them to get them to go anywhere.
These Asian carp actually came to the northern part of the United States through the south. They were introduced back in the 1970s as a way of controlling algae at fish farms in states like Arkansas. But then the fish overpopulated, and heavy rains and flooding carried them north. Reducing Asian carp is a top priority for the Illinois DNR's Aquatic Nuisance Species Program and its manager, Kevin Irons. The IDNR's objective is preventing the carp from reaching the Great Lakes, where they could devastate the $7 billion fishing industry. But Irons says Illinois can't fight the fish alone, so it's partnered with other state and federal agencies through the Asian Carp Regional Coordinating Committee to keep the invasive species from spreading.
The funding is essential. It's not just an Illinois issue, it's a national issue. So the partnerships with the Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS providing science leadership, coming together, sharing our findings, and coming up with the very best plan is essential on these big issues.
The Illinois DNR and its partners have been battling Asian carp for nearly 2 decades. The fishermen are among their most recent weapons. While netting might be considered a low-tech way of controlling the carp population, the partners are also deploying some rather high-tech methods as well. GPS and acoustic telemetry help locate the carp. Hydroacoustics can estimate the size of the fish population in a given area.
And we take a hydroacoustic boat in there, they can get an estimation of the biomass or how many pounds of fish are in there or the numbers of fish that are in there. They do that prior to fishing, and then after fishing, then they'll go back in and do the same thing, and then they can estimate how many fish they removed and what percentage of the population they removed.
Reducing the Asian carp population in the Illinois River reduces the chances of them making their way farther east. That limits their chances of penetrating electric barriers set up to keep the carp from getting into the Chicago area waterway system leading to the Great Lakes, less than 100 miles away. The Great Lakes Fishery Commission says the cooperation between states is helping protect vital native species like walleye and perch, 2 of the most popular freshwater fish in North America.
What that's led to through time is just the strong fishery that we see here, the great conditions that produce fantastic walleye year after year as a result of this cooperative fishery management.
All of these efforts have been paying off. Over the past 7 years, about 9 million pounds of carp have been taken from the upper Illinois River, reducing the population there by roughly 96%. Recently, the IDNR expanded its netting program to commercial fishermen on the south branch of the Illinois River, hoping to eventually reduce the number of Asian carp there by 70%.
That'd be a major step forward. It would help our native fish, reduce their impacts, and give us a way forward that we could do maybe mop-up work in the upper Illinois River and management and finding good or equitable use of these fish.
Irons says it would be impossible to eradicate all Asian carp from the Illinois River, but he's hopeful the river can one day return to the hospitable home it once was to its guild natives. I'm Diane Estabrook in Ottawa, Illinois.
Reporting on the plight of the Gila trout, our reporter Tim Estiloz went to New Mexico to investigate the impact the whitewater baldy fire had on the Gila trout population and how the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish are bringing them back through the Whitewater Creek Restoration Project.
Amid the beauty of the Gila wilderness in New Mexico, anglers from across the country love fishing in these remote waters with one specific goal in mind: to catch one of this area's uniquely native Gila trout.
Gila trout are an amazing fish that are, native to this region. It's the only place in the world where you can find these fish. They live in beautiful places. The Gila wilderness is an incredibly biodiverse area, and Gila trout have been there from the beginning.
However, in recent years, the Gila trout population here has faced some dangerously serious environmental challenges from non-native fish.
Rainbow trout are not native to this part of the country. They are native to the Pacific Northwest, and the fish were brought here in the early 1900s and stocked at that time. But rainbow trout and Gila trout hybridize, so they interbreed with one another. And so when we have Gila trout and rainbow trout in the same stream, they're hybridizing, and then we essentially don't have Gila trout anymore.
The New Mexico Department of Game and Fish is diligently working to combat this problem, to ensure the native Gila trout population is fully restored.
The Gila trout recovery program consists of a few different things. Our biggest goal is getting Gila trout more redundant on the landscape, putting out more populations, getting more active breeding. One of the things that we do is non-native trout removal. So one thing that we want to do to help recover Gila trout is remove rainbow trout as a threat. So that involves a couple different ways. One of the most common is a chemical removal.
These game and fish biologists also build artificial barriers or rely on natural ones, such as waterfalls, to prevent rainbow trout from swimming upstream to spawn. However, rainbow trout hasn't been the only hazard to the native Gila trout in this area.
Now, as beautiful as this area is, it's still in the process of rejuvenation. That's because in 2012, New Mexico's largest wildfire to date devastated this once lush area and its wildlife.
The whitewater baldy fire burned over 300,000 acres in the Gila National Forest, and almost all of the Gila trout populations at that time were within the perimeter of the fire. So at the time of the fire, there were 17 populations that existed on the landscape, and there were 6 populations that were completely removed by the fire and the aftermath of the fire. So it's really the post-fire flooding and the debris flows and all the ash in the water that results in a complete fish kill.
That had an economic impact on the town. Now, with things beginning to open back up and programs like the Gila trout, is rejuvenating an interest in people to come here. And that is what we need in Glenwood.
Fish biologists are seeing the Gila trout population rebound through a combination of efforts that are a mix of high tech and a throwback to the Old West.
You ready?
A lot of times when we begin either a stocking or basically a restoration, one thing we do is we work a lot with a hatchery system to get a brood stock developed. So in the morning, a lot of times I'll go up, probably grab those fish that we'll be stocking later in the day.
Then the fish are transported to the desert, where mules will carry the fish even higher up the mountain range to be released into the upper streams. All this hard work to restore and help the Gila trout to prosper is deeply appreciated by the local community.
I guess it's just seeing people light up to see that the stream and the fishing's been rejuvenated and that they can actually go up and catch a Gila trout that's as good as any trout to catch and enjoy.
It's particularly rewarding to see the kids. When the kids are part of these efforts and they see these amazing, beautiful fish, and they have the opportunity to fish for them and to experience them, that can be part of their life. That's the legacy that we need, is for the children, the future, to take part in the restoration and continued survival of Gila trout.
Abernathy Fish Technology Centre is unique both within and outside of the US Fish and Wildlife Service. Within the service, there are 7 fish technology centres, each focuses on scientific issues that are important to its region. Outside of the service, Abernathy works with partners to meet the mission to conserve our natural resources with others. Tim Estiloz finds out more.
These active and healthy freshwater fish are thriving, thanks in large part to the efforts taking place here. The Abernathy Fish Technology Center in Longview, Washington is home to a dedicated group of fish biologists employed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Abernathy Fish Technology Center is pretty unique, both within the service and outside of the service. Within the service, there are 7 fish technology centers. Each focuses on scientific issues that are of importance to that region. Outside of the service, folks may not have heard of us, but we are involved with the mission of the service, which is to conserve our natural resources with others.
Located in the Columbia River Basin, Abernathy has had a long relationship working with local communities and others to maintain a vibrant ecosystem, focusing primarily on native aquatic species.
In 1960 or so, this facility was primarily produced to raise Chinook salmon to mitigate for dams on the Columbia River. It was pretty rapidly realized that this would be a really nice place to develop some new fish culture techniques.
Here at Abernathy, it's not just the fish hatchery. It's also a place where scientists work diligently to confront many of the challenges facing aquatic species conservation.
Well, from an ecological perspective, aquatic invasive species, habitat alteration, and climate-driven changes to water temperature and flow regimes are the main challenges facing recovery and conservation of native fish and aquatic species. The Quantitative Ecology and Technology program here at Abernathy, supervised by Doug Peterson, investigates how these challenges are interacting and through applied research provides actionable information for managers of fisheries and aquatic habitat.
Science is the driving force behind the conservation efforts taking place at Abernathy, which not only makes the facility unique, but also highly productive and versatile.
What sets Abernathy apart from some similar facilities across the U.S. is our use of what we call rapid response genetic identification. And it's because in the part of the country we're located in the Pacific Northwest, there are many, many migratory fish populations that are above hydroelectric dams on the Columbia River. This turns into a problem when you have multiple dams on one river system and the person holding the fish doesn't know, did this fish come from 1 dam up or 2 dams up, or did it just come from right where I am and it just was swimming by and didn't need to be passed? Fortunately, the genetic information in that fish actually tells you what species it is or what population it came from.
Over the past 17 years, the genetic analysis capabilities at Abernathy have increased immensely, thanks to ever more sophisticated technology. Equipment that once could only read 16 sequences of DNA at a time, or even 96 sequences, have now given way to newer instruments that can read millions of DNA stretches. This increased capacity expands Abernathy's ability to work with partners to address shared information needs.
Here at Abernathy, we work with a number of partners for collecting genetic information to apply to management and conservation questions. For example, the state of Oregon, the state of Washington, several of our tribal partners, several PUDs or power companies up here in the Northwest require genetic information for conservation of fish species, but they don't necessarily have the capacity or the resources to address those genetic needs.
Abernathy scientists have also led the way in the area for nutrition for species including mussels and lampreys. Diets like the Abernathy diet for salmon were developed here. However, before Abernathy's innovations, the feeding of aquatic species was a messy affair.
What they were using before was the wet mix of different organ meats. And they would also use salmon carcasses, but they came to realize that that was imparting diseases into the feed, so they stopped doing that. They wanted to develop a better feed that was easier to feed, would store, because with that wet feed you'd have to have these huge freezers on station, so they developed a dry feed. It was nutritionally complete, and the fish were doing much better on that.
Abernathy stays on the cutting edge of science and technology, even when it comes to tracking the migration habits of aquatic species, such as the strong and powerful white sturgeon.
So what we have here is an important tool for fish research that has come about in the past 10 years or so. And these are tags that identify an animal with a unique numerical alphabetical coded number. Technology has improved and the size of the tags have been reduced such that we can use these tags in very tiny fish up to very large fish, and it allows us to monitor that individual animal throughout its whole life. So this here is a bony plate. I can kind of feel until it softens. Place the tag right underneath there, inject, and pull out.
The scientists here are passionate about the mission of the service because it's easy to be passionate about the mission of the service. It's about conservation of our natural resources, our habitats, our wildlife, our fish, our water that has to be clean. We are passionate about that. Plus, they get to study and do research in a field that they love. And that might be conservation genetics, it might be physiology, it might be ecology or nutrition. They are doing something that they like, and they're doing something that most people care about, whether they think about it or not: conservation.
Coming up, we're going to be looking at how SWCA environmental consultants are looking to help a species of endangered fish here in the US state of New Mexico.
The silvery minnow is under threat. On the endangered species list since 1994, it's struggling to adapt to mankind's footprint on the Rio Grande. A section of the river here in New Mexico has been artificially straightened and narrowed, limiting the area's floodplain and reducing nursery habitat for young fish. The impact on species like the silvery minnow is felt most acutely during droughts, like the one that gripped the US Southwest last year. But help is at hand. The New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission has been working with experts including SWCA environmental consultants for almost 2 decades to stop these fish slipping into extinction.
We need to create floodplain where there isn't any anymore, and so that's been our emphasis, is to try and make sure that during spring runoff we have the habitat that is so essential for silvery minnow and other fish to propagate.
The silvery minnow is native to this part of the Rio Grande, and experts say an understanding of this species can help better protect the wider ecosystem. SWCA environmental consultants have been using creative solutions to acquire greater environmental knowledge for the past 40 years.
We cling to that value of sound science, and a lot of times we find ourselves telling the client what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. And that has been one of the stalwarts of our company and the reason that we have been in existence as long as we have.
SWCA is keeping a close eye on the silvery minnow's life cycle. For the first time in New Mexico, researchers are examining silvery minnow otoliths, or ear bones. Like tree rings, this shows how old they are.
If we see 5 rings, it means it's 5 days post-hatch. And so now we can plug this data into looking at growth trajectories and environmental variables that contribute to faster growth and differences in growth.
This project began around 5 years ago. Researchers are monitoring over 20 different sites along this section of the Middle Rio Grande.
Usually what you'll see more than anything else is just a pair of like gold or silver dots, and that's what you're looking for.
And how small exactly are we looking?
A lot of them are shorter than my fingernail.
The aim is to better understand the ideal habitat for the silvery minnow.
We really need the expertise of contractors, consultants like SWCA to help us out and to help us come up with the best science possible on the river.
The hope is that science will guide management of the river to reduce the negative impacts on this fish species.
Heavy snowmelt this year is a blessing for conservationists, but the work done by SWCA environmental consultants is helping to provide consistent protection for the silvery minnow and the wider ecosystem here on the Rio Grande.
But lasting environmental protection may require help from beyond the scientific community.
The increased water use, the potential for the drought, the climate change, these are all challenges that we're facing. And so while I think we have a great potential, the future will be deciding that.
Big steps have been taken to recreate floodplains that have been previously lost. Researchers say the silvery minnow need these slow-moving, warm waters when they're young. But they aren't the only species to benefit.
These floodplains are beautiful for the fish, but they're also great for birds, like yellow-billed cuckoo, all of those species. The upper banks create habitat for the New Mexico jumping mouse, and then turtles, snakes. You see everything out here.
It could take another decade to collect enough data to know exactly which conditions along the Rio Grande are most favourable for the silvery minnow. But these researchers are confident their efforts can help pull this fish species back from the brink.
Lake Erie's ecosystem has recovered, allowing the walleye fishery to prosper. Recreational and commercial fisheries have benefited from agencies like Ohio Chapter of American Fisheries Society around the lake, partnering to collaboratively engage in adaptive, science-based management to ensure long-term fishery stability. KC finds out more.
We're in what they call the western basin of Lake Erie, on the north side of Ohio's north coast. This is not just a great place to fish, but it's also a success story as far as conservation and science. It took a lot of years to get Lake Erie ready for this, but now we're on a path of sustainability that has never been seen before in the Great Lakes.
This phenomenal fishery of Lake Erie generates a lot of economic value for Ohio. Statewide, it's an $800 million industry. And we want people to come here to fish for sustainable resources. We want them to spend their money, whether staying at hotels, gas, lodging, restaurants, fish and tackle. We want them to spend their money up here and enjoy Ohio.
In order to create a sustainable, popular fishery, many hands came together to bring Lake Erie back from a past of neglect and misuse.
We saw the Cuyahoga River burned in '69. The lake became the poster child for pollution problems in this country. We think the very next year, US EPA is formed, NOAA is formed, we celebrate the first Earth Day. It's all because of how we as a country responded to that event, that burning in '69. By 1985, Lake Erie becomes the walleye capital of the world. So we have a huge improvement in the ecosystem, but it took more than simply an ecosystem improvement. We also had to greatly improve our ability to manage the fishery.
If we go back 50 years, strong pollution in the lake really made it tough for fish to reproduce successfully. And for a while, walleye were extremely scarce. And as the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement took effect in the 1970s, as fishery managers got more and more information, they began to more deliberately set what they call quotas, or total allowable catch. And that process began in 1976. It continues to this day, where the fishery managers share their information and deliberate over how many fish they can take out to sustain that natural reproduction, which is so important to them. Walleye fisheries in Lake Erie should be great for the next many, many years to come.
And those efforts continue. When it comes to the health of the fishery, even charter boat captains become citizen scientists on the water.
This will be our 7th year now where we go out and once a week we go out and get water samples, and these go to Stone Lab. And they do the full chemistry on it, and we do random studies wherever we're at that particular day when we're fishing. So we have all the locations set down, and the plots that you see now, there's dots all over western Lake Erie to see where we've done. And it's been actually all over the various colleges now. Everyone uses this data. It's very verified, and it's a good set of data, and we can see what's going on.
We asked the people we interviewed how they really felt about Lake Erie.
There's nothing more fun or more pleasant for me than getting out on Lake Erie, spending the day on a boat. Even if you don't catch fish, it's beautiful out there. Thing is, with walleye right now, we know we're going to catch fish.
We kind of look at this lake as my lake, and obviously it's not, but we all look at it that way. Those are our fish, and we're trying to protect them. It's kind of like it's our backyard, it's my backyard, and I want it to be here when my grandkids come out here and they can do the same thing we've done all these years.
Lake Erie is the walleye capital of the world, and we have the highest catch rates of walleye and the most walleye in the world. This wouldn't be possible without the assistance of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, Ohio Sea Grant, and Michigan DNR, with valuable input from partners like the Lake Erie Charter Boat Association and the Polish Fishermen's Club.
For our 50th wedding anniversary, Fran and I brought 27 of our family members up here. We stayed in Sandusky. We spent a day on Lake Erie fishing. Had a great time. And it was so it means a lot. I fished, in Lake Erie as a kid with my dad and with my mother. So it's a long-time family tradition, and it's something that is very important to us.
Thank you for watching Fisheries Strong. We hope you've enjoyed this programme. All of our reports are available to view on the AFS website. The details are on the screen now. From me and the team here, thank you for watching. Goodbye.